Thank you for having me. I'm Nimra Sayed from New York University, Abu Dhabi, and today I'm going to present my paper on designing collapse, experiential foresight through short form games. Here's the question at the center of this work. How do we help people actually feel what it's like to live inside a collapsing system rather than just read about them? So, to start off, we know people do not act on futures they cannot inhabit. We produce scenarios and forecasts about climate breakdown, economic disruption, political fragmentation all the time. They are data rich, but research consistently shows they fail to generate the kind of emotional engagement that actually drives deliberation or behavioral change. So the problem isn't informational. We are not short on data, it's experiential. Traditional foresight, such as reports, scenarios, forecasts, narratives, gives you a text to read and discuss. While these may be cognitively rich, what it doesn't provide you is the felt weight of living inside that future. And that's the gap experiential foresight tries to close. Through designed experiences, you inhabit whether they might be artifacts, installation, games, or any other forms. This isn't a new idea per se. Stuart Candy argues futures need to be felt, and that designed artifacts can do that. Jane McConigal's work on games also gives us the first person future, placing players inside a scenario so it feels like it's happening to them. And John Sweeney has built foresight games for EU and UN policy contexts that provide facilitation level guidance. So the theoretical case for games as future instruments is well established. What's still missing is the practical layer underneath it, which is design level heuristic. Think of it as actual guidance for practitioners building short form digital games that stage a future as something you can interact with and not just watch. And that's the gap this paper is trying to fill. To do that, I ground the work in Jim Dater's Four Futures framework and focus on one archetype in particular, which is collapse. Drawing on Joseph Tainter's works, collapse here means the loss of complexity that sustains coordinated life, a breakdown that unfolds gradually and that no single person can really stop. So here I analyzed three short digital games, each one compressing a large systemic issue into something playable in a short span of time, say 90 seconds to 5 minutes. The first one, Metamorphosis, is on bureaucratic labor. The Floor is Water, about climate and sea levels rise. And the third one, Cellular Wars, is on dual use biomedical technology. Collapse serves as the generative first case here, and the framework itself is meant to, and you're invited to, extend to the other three archetypes in the future. So let's walk through the three games, and I'll start off first with Metamorphosis. This is a marks and symbol flavored alienation, gamified. It's a browser based office simulator where you answer emails, fill out reports, sit through meetings, all deliberately banal, while a glitch timer counts down in the background. And here's the important part, that timer runs completely independent of what you do. Comply, resist, ignore it, collapse arrives on schedule regardless. The detail I want to highlight is in the corner of this screen, which is an activity feed logging other invisible workers doing the exact same tasks in parallel. You're never alone, but you're never actually connected to anyone either. That's the game's futures device. I call it ambient plurality. It's the one mechanic that if you remove it, the game would still function, but it would stop making its argument about networked isolation. The second case is The Floor is Water. It's an intentional pun on floor is lava, and this one is fast and anxious by design. You're the mayor of a coastal city. Real NOAA and IPCC sea level projections are behind the numbers, and you're given 90 seconds and two tools, wood barriers and stone barriers. Place them fast enough, and you keep the water out. Here's the twist that makes it work. Wood decays a few seconds after the water touches it. Stone doesn't. So very quickly you learn a hard lesson. Whatever land you lose to the water, you just don't get it back. That asymmetry between wood and stone is the future's device here. It's not a gameplay balance choice, it's the whole argument where emergency response buys you time, but climate loss, once it happens, is permanent. The argument about irreversibility is built right into the material logic of the game itself. The third case is a game called Cellular Wars. Here, you control a programmable micro robot inside the human body. Before you even start playing, you have to make one choice: ally with the white blood cells and heal, or defect to the viruses and betray. That choice is irrevocable for the whole session. So, what's striking is that from there, the mechanics are identical no matter which side you picked. Same controls, same upgrade shop, same difficulty level. The only thing that changes is which side you are shooting at. That structural symmetry is the future's device here, the ethical bifurcation. It makes the point that the capability for harm and the capability for healing are mechanically the same thing. What differs is allegiance, not the tool itself. It doesn't care which side you're on once you've picked, you'll live with it for the rest of the run. So, putting these three games side by side, you will notice there are three very different contextual domains: labor, climate, biotech, and three very different player postures for each game, from a passive sufferer to an outmatched manager, all the way to a moral agent making a binding choice. But look at the last column. Each game has exactly one mechanic that carries its foresight argument. You remove it and the game still runs, it just stops being a foresight artifact and becomes a generic game in its genre. And that's the pattern I want to draw out next. Across all three games, there's a shared claim being made procedurally where collapse is structural and not a personal failing. The glitch timer in Metamorphosis doesn't care if you comply or resist. The wood in the floor is water decays no matter how well you place it, and the wave escalation in Cellular Wars keeps climbing regardless of your ethical alignment on your or even your combat skill. So in every case, skill can delay the outcome. Nothing the player does can prevent it though. And that's Tainter's account of collapse made playable. The second pattern is about how much control the player has, and it turns out that if you plot the three games on a line, you get a spectrum. From total lack of control, to control that matters but isn't enough, to a single consequential moral choice. That spectrum itself is a design tool. Metamorphosis sits at an enforced compliance. You are interacting but with no meaningful control. The floor is water sits in the middle at a constrained action. Your choices do matter, but you're structurally outmatched. And in Cellular Wars, this sits at ethical negotiation, a single structurally consequential moral choice. And together, they present three different arguments about how much an individual can actually do in the face of a systemic force. One more pattern before we talk about the framework itself is where each game sits on the future's plausibility spectrum changes what time compression does. So, Metamorphosis is indistinguishable from the present. 5 minutes is long enough to feel and short enough to sustain as a designed experience, though it risks being read as a present day satire rather than a future condition. The Floor is Water, on the other hand, is built on documented NOAA IPCC projections. 90 seconds compresses decades of sea level rise into a single felt interval. The player inhabits the future in real time. And Cellular War speculates past and the present into dual-use biotech territory. The short form forces the ethical argument to the surface immediately and runs throughout the game. There's no time to forget the allegiance choice that you've made. That analysis is where the paper's central contribution comes from: the 7 heuristics for designing experiential foresight games. So the first one, future archetype encoding, is the archetype's logic that has to live in the rules so that the player the players encounter its logic through action and not just the story itself. Second is the agency calibration. That is, how much control you give the player is a claim about individual power and agency within the systemic forces. Third is the temporal framing. Time, as we know it, is foundational to foresight. Design, play duration, pacing, and timescale creates a felt relationship between the playtime and the future horizons. Systemic legibility. This makes macro forces readable through feedback without relying too much on expository text. And then there is the player posture by design. Deciding who acts and who's acted upon, and whether individual action shapes or is shaped by systemic forces, is an important factor as well. And then the interaction register. This is the core verb of the game that has to carry the argument in the player's hands throughout. And the final one that I have briefly spoken about earlier on is the futures devices. This one sits slightly apart. It's this convergence point where the one mechanic in each game, where all the other heuristics fuse together into something almost irreducible. It's what makes a game Foresight artifact and not just a well-made game. So, stepping back, this paper contributes a practice oriented, archetype agnostic heuristic framework, plus allows or gives a comparative lens for analyzing game based foresight work. To be upfront about its limits, this is a small corpus. 3 games from one shared studio brief, and the evidence is design rationale and play testing observation, not the control data on player effect. So what's next is testing these same 7 heuristics against Dater's other archetypes, the growth, discipline, and transformation, and ideally against foresight tools which are built outside a studio context would be a great way to go about it. So here's the question I'd leave you with. The next time you read a headline about collapse, economic, ecological, whatever it is, ask yourself whether you actually feel it or just know it. That gap is exactly what these games are built to close. Thank you very much. Please feel free to reach out to me, and I'd be happy to take questions or have continued conversations, either through email or via LinkedIn. Have a great rest of the conference.